A cold, gray dawn hung over the orphanage like a shroud. The thin panes of glass rattled against a breath of wind pressing in from the harbor, mist clinging to the window ledges like stubborn ghosts. Inside the long, dim room, rows of narrow cots lined the walls, each one a small island of sleep. But not for Mary Ellen. She lay awake, her eyes open in the half-dark, watching the other girls slowly stir, their faces hollow and pale, smudged with last night's ash from the stove. She was 9 years old, but the eyes that blinked back at her in the window's reflection belonged to someone older, much older, someone who had learned to leave hunger and loneliness behind like old shoes too tight to wear. A voice cracked through the silence. "Trains in an hour. Dress." It was the matron, Miss Greeley, her hair scraped into a tight knot, a faded shawl draped around her shoulders. No one answered. No one protested. The girls moved like ghosts, pulling threadbare stockings up over skinny legs, fingers fumbling with buttons in the cold. Mary Ellen reached beneath her pillow. Her fingers closed around the small, tattered slate, its surface worn and nicked. The piece of chalk she kept tucked inside her shoe was a stub so small it bit into her heel when she walked, but she dared not leave it behind. She pressed the slate to her chest for a moment before sliding it under the thin mattress. She wouldn't need it on the train. She'd heard them talk. Kansas. Wide skies, fields like oceans, houses where kind women baked bread, and children sat at desks and learned their letters. She'd imagined it, lying in her cot at night, drawing words on the ceiling in her mind. School. A place where no one grabbed your arm to scrub floors or slapped your cheek when you spoke out of turn. The floorboards creaked as the old janitor made his rounds. Mr. Bauer shuffled between the beds, his long coat frayed at the cuffs, his face a map of cracked lines and sunspots. The other girls never noticed him, but Mary Ellen watched as he stooped by her cot. He knelt and reached for her shoe. She held her breath, heart thudding, sure he'd find the chalk. But he only tightened the laces with stiff, gnarled fingers, then pressed something small and hard into her pocket. A crust of stale bread. His rough hand lingered for a second, a silent thing, neither kindness nor pity, and then he moved on. She didn't thank him. She knew better. But she met his eyes, watery, gray, tired, and the smallest nod passed between them. It was enough. They were marched from the orphanage in a straight line, the older girls leading, the littlest trailing behind like ducklings. The streets of New York were heavy with soot, the air thick with chimney smoke and the stink of horse droppings. Vendors hawked onions and lamp oil, and carts rattled by, wheels sloshing through puddles. At the station, the world pressed in close. The sharp stink of coal and wet wool hung in the air. Train whistles pierced the morning gloom. Men shouted. Steam billowed in white sheets, rising into the gray sky like something unearthly. 5 children. 1 trunk, its leather straps worn and one corner split. A priest stood waiting, his coat too new, his face unfamiliar, clean-shaven, with eyes that didn't quite meet theirs. Each child bore a tag pinned to their chest. Mary Ellen's Reed. Mary Ellen Fairchild. Age 9. Quiet. Good with chores. She reached up and fingered the card as if it belonged to someone else. The matron barked at them to stand still. The priest counted them, lips moving. Beside her, Maggie gripped her wrist. Maggie was older, 12, maybe 13. A scrawny girl with copper hair hacked unevenly at the chin. She'd been sent on the Orphan Train last year, only to come back months later after her first placement failed. "Don't look at them when you step off," Maggie muttered under her breath. "Don't look." Mary Ellen nodded. Her fingers felt numb. The train bell clanged, a deep, brassy sound that rolled through the station like a wave. A man in a long coat called for boarding. The priest led them forward, their thin shoes clacking on the platform boards. The world blurred as she climbed the steps. The coal smoke burned her throat, the heat of the engine fierce against her face. She clung to Maggie's hand, to the bread in her pocket, to the rough wool of her coat. Inside, the car smelled of damp wood and soot. Benches lined either side, and oil lamps swung overhead. The train shuddered once, then again. The whistle wailed a long, mournful sound. Mary Ellen turned, peering through the grimy window. The city loomed behind them, crooked chimneys, the slums, A line of laundry strung between two tenements. A woman leaning out a window, smoking. Her last glance. The only home she'd ever known, hard as it was. No tears. She pressed her palm flat to the glass, felt the cold bite of it, the smear of soot. The train lurched, wheels grinding against the tracks. Faces faded into smoke. The orphanage would wake to new faces tomorrow. No one would say her name again. Beside her, Maggie's grip tightened. The city fell away. Dust settled heavy in the tiny Kansas town of Dry Creek, clinging to the air like a second skin. The train hissed to a stop, wheels grinding against the rusted tracks, a thin plume of steam curling skyward and vanishing into the hard, white-blue sky. The 5 children stepped down from the train, one by one, blinking against the glare. Their faces were drawn and colorless, clothes stiff with days of travel and old soot. Mary Ellen could feel the weight of the dust on her skin, in her hair, in the hollow of her throat. A small crowd waited at the platform, sun-leathered men in sagging hats, women in faded calico with their mouths set in sharp lines. Their eyes were like glass marbles, pale, hard, unblinking. They didn't smile. They didn't wave. They stared as if sizing up livestock. The priest cleared his throat, a dry, rasping sound in the stillness. He held a paper in one trembling hand, the name smudged and curling at the corners. Mary Ellen's heartbeat was loud in her ears, a quick, tight drum that seemed to throb inside her head. The priest called the first name. A tall boy, red-haired and raw-boned, was claimed by a man with a thick belt and a heavy brow. No words, just a nod, a grip of the shoulder, a hand passing coins. The boy didn't look back. Another name. A freckled girl with hollow cheeks went next, claimed by a plump woman whose face was a strange mix of kindness and calculation. The girl clung to her only possession, a ragged cloth doll, until it was pulled from her hand. Mary Ellen's name was the third. Mary Ellen Fairchild. The priest croaked, not bothering to lift his eyes from the paper. A woman in a yellow bonnet stepped forward, sharp as a hawk. She squinted at Mary Ellen, tilted her head, and asked in a voice like a fence rail, "She strong? Can she sew?" The priest managed a weary nod. "Obedient," he said. "Promised her school." The woman snorted. "That's what they all say. Schools and Bibles, till they're stealing eggs and breaking windows." She stepped back, folding her arms. From the edge of the crowd came another pair, an old man and woman, gray-haired, their faces cut from dry riverbed stone. The man wore a brimmed hat pulled low, his jaw working on something she couldn't see. The woman, thin lips, sharp nose, eyes like scorched glass, stepped forward. "This one," she said, nodding at Mary Ellen. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter," the priest murmured, scribbling something on his paper. Mrs. Carter's hand clamped down on Mary Ellen's shoulder, a grip like an iron hook. The pressure sent a cold ache through her bones. "You'll be grateful, girl," the woman said, her breath sour with old tea and vinegar. "We take what's given. Could have been worse." Mary Ellen dared a glance past the woman's shoulder. A schoolhouse sat at the far end of the road, whitewashed walls glowing in the sunlight, windows catching flickers of light. A boy sat outside on a step, his nose buried in a book, his feet kicking at the dust. For a moment, the ache in her chest lightened. The word school whispered in her mind. Hope flickered. The Carters led her past the church, its steeple leaning slightly to one side, past the general store, where a weathered sign hung crooked above the porch, past a dry well with a cracked bucket hanging uselessly from a frayed rope. The dirt road stretched long and empty. Each step kicked up dust that clung to her skin. They reached the farmhouse as the sun started to lean toward evening. The house looked like it might sigh and settle into the earth at any moment, its roof sagging, one shutter hanging loose. A tired barn slumped behind it, half swallowed by tall grass. Inside, the kitchen was dim and stale. A single oil lamp burned on the table, its glass chimney smudged. The air was thick with the sour scent of old potatoes and lye soap. Mrs. Carter gestured toward a dark corner by the stove. "You'll sleep there." A chain clinked as she pulled it from behind a woodpile. One end was bolted to the wall. The other was a tarnished iron cuff. Mary Ellen's stomach twisted. Her throat tried to close. Mrs. Carter didn't hesitate. She grabbed Mary Ellen's thin ankle and fastened the chain around it. The metal was cold against her skin, rough-edged. You run, you starve. You backtalk, you bleed. Her voice was flat, like she was reciting a verse. School's for decent folk. The stove radiated heat. Mary Ellen could already feel it warming her skin, the edge of it harsh and stinging. A single blanket lay folded on the floor. No pillow. No word of kindness. The room grew dimmer as the sun bled out of the sky. Mrs. Carter busied herself at the counter, slicing something unseen. Mr. Carter sat at the table, drinking something dark from a tin cup, his eyes never lifting. The last word spoken to her that night was a single, sharp command: firewood at dawn. The house creaked as it settled into night. Mary Ellen curled against the floorboards, her cheek pressed to the rough wood. A mouse rustled somewhere near the hearth. The chain pulled tight if she shifted too far. She reached down into her shoe for the piece of chalk. It crumbled between her fingers, dry, brittle dust. She closed her hand around it anyway. Snow crept through the cracks in the walls like cold fingers, settling along the edges of the room and in the hollows of the window frame. The wind moaned through the broken boards of the barn, rattling loose shutters in the dead hours before dawn. The floorboards chilled beneath Mary Ellen's thin blanket, the chain at her ankle cold as river ice. Each day bled into the next without shape or mercy. Wood chopped, water hauled, bread kneaded, ashes swept, eyes averted. No word spoken unless ordered, and then only quick and small. Mary Ellen moved through them like a shadow, keeping her shoulders hunched, her hands working, her face blank. She counted the days by the shape of the sunrise through the warped window glass, sharp and blue, then pale and flat, then gray and absent behind the thick snow. Her back ached from the weight of the woodpile, her hands chapped and raw from icy buckets drawn from the frozen well. She'd learned how to hold her breath through the worst of the cold, how to steal extra crumbs without being seen, how to listen to the world outside while pretending to hear nothing at all. In stolen moments, she dreamed. In the hush of night, when the Carters' heavy snores filled the house, she'd close her eyes and trace letters against the back of her hand with a fingertip. ABC. Words she remembered from long ago before the slate was taken, before the chalk was dust. She saw them rise in her mind like white shapes against the black ceiling, words without a voice but with weight and meaning. One night, a fierce wind rattled the latch on the kitchen door. Snow had fallen for days, piling against the walls, muting the world. A gust caught the door, blew it inward with a shriek. Cold air knifed into the room. Mary Ellen lay motionless, watching the dark doorway. The chain around her ankle felt like ice. The wind howled. No one stirred. For the first time in months, she moved toward the open door. The chain dragged through the snow-drifted floor. It reached just far enough. She stepped out, the cold shocking against her skin. Snow numbed her feet at once. The stars above were fierce and bright, scattered like spilled salt against black cloth. She tipped her head back, mouth open, breath rising in pale ribbons. It was the first time she'd seen the night sky in so long she'd forgotten the shape of it. A hand grabbed the back of her dress, yanking her backward. Mrs. Carter's face, pale and pinched with fury, appeared in the dark, a switch already raised. Ungrateful wretch! The blows fell fast and hard. Mary Ellen made no sound. The door slammed shut. The chain pulled tight. The stove's heat bit at her skin once more. She heard the schoolhouse bell sometimes, carried faint and thin on the wind. Midday, when the sun was highest. The sound of boys shouting, girls' laughter rising and falling in waves. She pictured them, clean pinafores, slates in hand, reading hymns from lined pages. Once, while hauling water, she found a scrap of paper caught against a fence post, the wind plastering it there. An arithmetic table, numbers smudged and faint. She stole it into her dress. Later, by the dying fire, she studied it with what little light there was, mouthing the numbers in silence. She hid it beneath the loose floorboard by the stove. Another day. A hymn sheet discarded by the well, damp and torn. She smoothed it flat against her thigh and committed it to memory. She repeated it over and over, the words a strange comfort in her head. She began to search the trash heap behind the barn whenever she could, pretending to scatter scraps for the chickens. Bits of paper, torn book corners, a broken pencil with no point. All treasures. Late one evening, as a storm crouched heavy over the plains, a rider came down the road. The hooves of his horse, crunching over packed snow, sounded loud in the silence. The man dismounted slowly, pulling his coat tight against the wind. Sheriff Harlan, tall, square-shouldered, his mustache flecked with frost. He knocked on the door with the back of his hand. Mary Ellen knelt by the stove, a pail of kindling at her side. She watched through a veil of hair. The sheriff stepped inside, bringing with him the bitter scent of cold and horses. His gaze swept the room, landed on Mary Ellen, then on the chain at her ankle. His face didn't move. His eyes stayed on the iron cuff for a long moment. Mrs. Carter's voice came sharp and bright. "She's simple, that one," she said, a brittle laugh in her throat. "Runs off. Won't stay put, won't listen. We had to do something." The sheriff said nothing. He spat a string of tobacco juice into the fire, where it hissed. Then he turned and left. The door closed behind him. Mary Ellen didn't look up. The church bell tolled the next morning, long, low strokes in the brittle air. A funeral. She heard the gathered voices drift across the empty fields, the hymn rising thin and slow. She recited it silently as she knelt by the stove, her lips barely moving. Winter frost flowers bloomed on the window panes, curling in delicate white shapes. She traced them with a finger when no one watched, pretending they were letters she could read. A stray cat came scratching at the door one night, ribs sharp under a coat of matted fur. Its ears were blackened with frostbite, its tail a limp rope. Mary Ellen fed it crumbs and bits of fat when she could. It crept into the corner near her blanket, curling against her legs. She whispered its name. Psalm. It stayed. A storm rolled in with the first breath of spring, the clouds thick and mean, gathering low over the flat land like a dark ceiling ready to split. Thunder cracked the brittle sky, sharp and sudden, shaking the old house down to its crooked bones. The wind clawed at the shutters. Rain came in quick slashes against the glass. Inside, Mary Ellen knelt by the stove, her hands raw and blistered from a winter's worth of wood and water. The skin across her knuckles split, the ache deep in her bones. The chain hung loose around her ankle, cold against the place where the skin had hardened to a ring of scar tissue. The fire burned low, but the storm drove wine down the chimney in sudden gusts. One sharp breath of air sent a spark leaping from the hearth. It landed on the frayed edge of the curtain above the window. A thin, eager tongue of flame licked upward. Mary Ellen saw it catch, the fire blooming in a burst of orange against the gray, and for a moment she didn't move. She only watched. Mrs. Carter's voice shrieked from the other room. Feet thundered against the floorboards. The fire took fast, dry wood, old rags, dust-thick corners. The curtain flared, dropped burning scraps to the floor. Smoke rolled up the wall, curling black against the ceiling. Mary Ellen's hand shot out, snatching Psalm from his place beside the stove. The cat gave a sharp yowl as she clutched him to her chest. The chain at her ankle, the thing that had held her to this place, this life, this silence, was forgotten. The world had changed in an instant. The walls no longer fences, but tinder. Mrs. Carter's scream split the air again, but no one grabbed Mary Ellen's wrist this time. No one yanked her back. She bolted through the kitchen door into the storm. The rain met her in cold sheets, driving down from the sky. It hissed against the flames as they climbed higher, the old house roaring like something alive at last. Light burst from the windows, the shingles catching fire, the roof sagging in defeat. The world around her was wet earth and thunder. Smoke mixed with rain, curling pale and thick into the night sky like a ghost uncoiling. No one followed. No one called her name. She ran barefoot through the mud, Psalm's small body clutched against her chest, the chain at her ankle forgotten, dragging wet earth behind her. The sharp edges of stones cut her feet, but she didn't stop. Lightning split the sky, a jagged streak of white against the dark. The prairie stretched endless in every direction, and for the first time since the day she stepped off the train, she belonged to it. The house behind her cracked and fell, a sheet of flame swallowed by the storm. Dawn came pale and heavy. The storm had passed, but left the world washed and empty. Smoke rose in lazy spirals from the blackened wreck of the Carter house, curling toward the dull sky. Mary Ellen walked alone down the long dirt road. The mud caked to her legs, the cat still pressed to her ribs. The world was quiet, the air thick with the sour-sweet smell of wet ashes. The town of Dry Creek stirred awake as she passed. A curtain twitched. A man led a mule from a barn, stopped, and stared. No one spoke. No one asked. Her feet carried her to the schoolhouse, its white walls streaked with rain, the bell rope hanging limp against the post. She stepped through the open doorway, her hair plastered to her face, her dress streaked with soot and mud. Inside, the schoolmaster looked up from his desk. His beard was gray and sharp, his spectacles slipping down his nose. He stared as if she were something pulled from the earth, some wild thing made of mud and ash and stubborn will. She opened her mouth. The words stuck, thick in her throat. Then, at last, her voice broke the long silence. "I want to learn." The words hung in the air, strange and fragile, a breath spoken aloud for the first time. Behind her, the bell tolled once. Then again. A hand settled on her shoulder. She turned. Maggie. Older now, taller, her hair darker, cut unevenly to her chin. The same hard line to her mouth. The same eyes. A glance passed between them. A small, fierce thing. A nod. No words. The cat purred, a weak, ragged sound against her ribs. The schoolmaster rose slowly, as though from a great distance, and set a piece of chalk into her hand. It felt warm, as if it had been waiting for her. She curled her fingers around it. The scar on her ankle ached, a thin, tight band that would never leave. It would be a part of her, like her name. The school bell rang again, sharp and clear, cutting through the still morning. It kept ringing,